Okay, we're continuing with the din of Rishus Harabim, enter a little bit into Carmelis, and discuss the Kuntas Achron of the Alter Rebbe, the one that we're supposed to discuss, Kuntas Achron Beis. Hopefully you all learned it. If you didn't learn it, the shiur will serve as an introduction, and then you will be able to learn it. First, just going to go with a small seif in Siman Shimon Hein Alter Rebbe, Seif Yud Gimel. If you have something in the Rishus Harabim which is exactly 9 tefachim high, that's roi lekatefalav, that you could use it for fixing what you're carrying, and it's not higher than 9, it's not lower than 9, and a lot of people use it, then it becomes like a Rishus Harabim Gemura, even if it's not dalad al dalad. Why? Because tzarich l'rabim, the people use it. Being Alter Rebbe's lashon came from tzarich l'rabim, Rishus Harabim hu bein rochav bein kotzer. However, if it's less than 9, then it's not roi lekituf, even if people do use it. From 9 to 10, Yeshayimrim, that's Rishus Harabim, and some say no. And over 10, you already go into the category that it's Rishus Hayachid if it's 4x4, and if it's less than 4x4, it is a Mokim Ptur. That means once it's over 10, then it already goes into the category of Rishus Midiraisa. Yeah, well, either it's Rishus Hayachid or it's a Mokim Ptur. Now we're going to go into what we want to discuss. Seif Yud Daled, the Alter Rebbe discusses about a little hole in the Rishus Harabim. If it's less than 3 tefachim deep, it's definitely Rishus Harabim, no question about it. People just walk right through it. People don't even realize that it's there. Or maybe they do, but they still walk through it. If it's under 10, more than 3 and up to 10, it's no longer a Rishus Harabim, it's not bottled to Rishus Harabim right away, it becomes a Carmelis. If it's 4x4 wide. And if it's less than 4x4 wide, then it becomes a Mokim Ptur, regardless of how deep it is, even if people use it on a regular basis. Now, if it's deep, 10 tefachim, and it's wide, 4x4, and the depth of it is mislaket in less than 4 amas, that means it's steep enough to become its own Rishus, then it's Rishus Hayachid. Why? Because it has mechitzis inside of it. It doesn't have mechitzis on it, it has mechitzis inside of it. And we already went through the previous 2 shiurim ago that when you have the whole discussion whether we do count the mechitzis whether the mechitzis are something or not, the mechitzis go up, they don't go up. If you step on the mechitzas, what the din is, and that is exactly what we're going to be discussing today. The shit of the Alter Rebbe about bitul mechitza in Rishus Hayachid and in Rishus Harabim. Move on to Seif Tesvav. If this hole, which is 4x4 wide and wide by length, and it's 10 deep, is filled with something, with water or with anything else which keeps the mechitzas visible, then it's still considered a mechitzas are still there. The mechitzas do not become nisbatal, do not become cancelled out by it. If it's filled with fruits or anything else that's filled with, the hole is filled up, whatever area is filled up is mevatal the mechitzas that it's blocking from seeing. So if it will be deep 20 and it will be filled with 10 tefachim of fruits, then the other 10 tefachim are still there. And it's still Rishus Hayachid. But if it would be filled, if it's 10 tefachim and 9 of them are filled, then the mechitzas are bottled, and we look at it as if it's only 1 tefach. Hi. Yeah, that is midiraisa. Yeah, these 2 things are midiraisa. Now, what happens if it's like we said, it's deep 10, it's wide 4x4, and it's filled with water. Midiraisa, the mechitzas is not bottled. What's the din of this midiraisa? It's Rishus Hayachid. However, the Alter Rebbe adds on it, if they walk over it, it becomes a karmelis midrabanan, just like sea and rivers that also become a karmelis, even though it's essentially could be a reshus hayachid. We're going to get to that idea soon. It's essentially a reshus hayachid, according to the Alter Rebbe, but we still becomes a karmelis midrabanan, and you can't carry in it, you can't carry into it, you can't carry out of it. Midiraisa, you carry into it, you're carrying from reshus harabim to reshus hayachid. Carrying out of it, it's also reshus hayachid to reshus harabim. Carrying within it, will be fine. But according to the Chachamim, in the karmelis, you can't carry within it. You can't carry within it either. That's if, obviously, if it's mislaket within 4 amas, because then we consider it a mechitza. If it's mislaket more than 4 amas, it's not a reshus hayachid midiraisa, because it's more than 4 amas. It's not a reshus harabim midiraisa, because it's deep 10, and it's not comfortable to go through it, even though there is Rabbi Mahalchim boy. Move on, Sifta Zayin. This is all I'm giving as introduction. Sifta Zayin, if you have a puddle of water in a reshus harabim, if it's less than 10 tefachim deep, it's batel to the reshus harabim, regardless of what the width of it is. But on condition that many walk right through it, and they don't avoid it. They don't go around it. That means they walk right through it, and they don't go around it. Why? Because even though it's not so comfortable, tashmish al dei etchak is considered tashmish. Now, what would that be? Yes, every person sees a puddle and he's walking with shoes, he's going to avoid the puddle. But if the puddle is not so deep, and but his puddle is wide, or the puddle is blocking your way, you will go through it. If you're wearing boots, you also will go through it. So it is a tashmish. It is, people do use it, that chak, but it's still a tashmish, and therefore it is, being that it's not always, you don't always walk around it, then it's considered a tashmish, and it's considered still batel to the reshus harabim. Obviously, if it's so deep that nobody's going to walk through, if there's an open manhole cover filled with water, nobody's going right into it, even if it would be less than 10 tefachim deep. You have the sewer boxes for the rainwater. If you open them up, lav dafka the 10 tefachim, not all of them are 10 tefachim deep. If you open them up, lav dafka is 10 tefachim. You go into them, nobody's walking into there, even when it's hard to walk. You will walk around it. Same thing when you have a plank of wood, a daf, on top of this puddle, hole, whatever it is, that also cancels its status and it makes it batel to a reshus harabim. However, if the majority of people do not walk through it, rather they'll walk around it, and yes, there are a few meshugaim that will walk through it, but they are not the standard, then it's not considered a reshus harabim, even if it is, depth is 9. That is regarding reshus harabim. Now, being that we're discussing this puddles, we're going to discuss also one nekuda from karmelis. In if you test, the Alter Rebbe discusses karmelis. One of the parts that the Alter Rebbe discusses if you test is v'chein hayamim v'anechalim, regarding seas and rivers, that they are more than 10 deep, and the water are not mevatel the mechitzas like we just said before, because you see the mechitzas through the water. So then, if the depth of it is mislaket in more than 4 amas, and it's not a reshus hayachid. Only if it's less than 4 amas, then you could consider the reshus hayachid. If it's more than 4 amas, for the steep, if the incline is not so steep to make it a reshus hayachid, it's not a reshus hayachid midiraisa. Can't be a reshus harabim, even though it's commonly used. And what is it commonly used by? Sfinis, by boats. It's not commonly used for walking, it's commonly used by boats. Still has rabim, mehalchim boy, still not considered reshus harabim, even though it has rabim, because it doesn't have nichot hashmishte. The next rule that comes to it's relevant to make it Reshus Harabim, aside for that Rabbi Mahalchim Bo is also Nichat Hashmishti. It's got to be something that's comfortable or easy, at least somewhat, to use, and this is not. And therefore, being that it's not Nichat Hashmishti, it's not Doime anymore to Digli Midbar, and therefore it's not considered a Reshus Harabim. We obviously try to compare everything to Digli Midbar. This is why we compare, because again, the halacha is that we do compare to Digli Midbar when it comes to 600,000 and everything else. But when it comes over here, we say it's not Doime to Digli Midbar, it's not Nichat Hashmishti, so we it can't be considered a Reshus Harabim midaraisa. What is the difference? We're going to see soon. Now, what happens if you have a hole that does have the steep incline like we're supposed to have, 10 tfachim within 4 amas, and it's Reshus HaYachid min HaTorah by definition. However, people walk alongside of it. It doesn't have a defined edge. Rather, it's just a hole in the ground, and people walk around it. The Chachamim converted it into a Carmelis. Why? Being that Oivrim, that you walk on top of the mechitzas, from on top of it, it's mevatel the mechitzas, even though inside of it is a Reshus Harabim, and those mechitzas become batul. Now, just a side point before we continue. We did mention that to make it Reshus Harabim, the sea, the rivers, are not Reshus Harabim, even though there's Rabbi Mahalchim Boy, for various reasons. There's Mislaket and Rabbi Mahalchim Boy with boats, but it's not Nicha Tashmishti. So someone could say, I don't have any Nicha on it. Maybe highways which are only cars go by it, narrower highways that don't have big enough shoulders you could walk by, or you can't go on and off them easily. They have the gates on the sides, only cars go through it. So yes, Rabim Mehalchim Boy. Lavdavka it's Nichat Hashmishti. Maybe it's Nichat Hashmishti just like a ship, maybe not. I don't know on it. Just putting it out there for you to think. The Alter Rebbe has a long Kuntra Sachin, Sifkotten Beis, on this idea of Bitul Mechitzis, that the Alter Rebbe writes that if you walk on top of the Mechitzis of this hole, that's essentially the Reshus HaYachid, inside, that's dug inside the Reshus Harabim, even though it's the Reshus HaYachid, being that people walk on the Mechitzis of it, Chachamim made it into a Carmelis. Yeah, the Kuntra Sachin is on Sif Yutes, but it's also relevant to Sif Tesvav and Sif Yutes because it's discussed this idea in both places, but it's mentioned in Sif Yutes because that's where the Alter Rebbe mentions about the mevatla mechitzas by walking over it, over the mechitzas. Now, just before we continue, a practical example, I'm asking you what relevance is there about bitul mechitzas. Very simple. Before we're going to get into details, very simple. You have a river going through a city, and you can see in places a river, and sometimes they build on the side of the river like walls, and then they build houses. So then you could count the wall. You might be able to count the walls in mechitza, right? What happens if you have a dock that's going over the mechitza? Or you walk on the mechitza itself also. You have a walkway along the river. Yeah? Your whole mechitza became batal now, because it's a Carmelis. Maybe it's a Carmelis. If a Rabbi Mahalchim Boy, if it's in the Reshus Harabim, then lavdavk it's mevatel mechitzas, lavdavk you could use these mechitzas. So it's important to have this in mind, even though it's a chumrah of the chumrah. We're going to see soon how it applies. But the idea that a lot of people could walk through on top of a mechitza, on the edge of a mechitza, and cancel it and eliminate this mechitza, and it's no longer considered a mechitza, will become relevant much more often than you think. You'll start looking and you'll see. If you're looking to build a Eruv, you can certainly start counting these in a city. Start counting these walls. You have to also see if people are walking on those areas. So now, maybe it's not nicha.
And Yam also, you could swim inside.
Not swimming, we're talking about walking comfortably along on the mechitza. A yam, a beach, is not a mechitza because it's not mislaket. In general, a yam is not a mechitza on the beach side. You'll never, very rarely will you see a yam that is mislaket by a beach side. Usually it's mislaket on the bay side where it's deep, straight down, not on the beach side. I don't know if I ever went to the beach, but if I ever did go to the beach, you'll see there's a reason why people go to the beach and they walk, they don't jump. It's because it's not mislaket, mitech dal adamas. If it's mislaket, they will just have to jump into the water, not walk. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe begins by bringing by this discussion, and he brings the Magen Avraham. The Magen Avraham brings an example when it comes to something which is a karmelis. He brings an example of a karfuf. A karfuf is a empty lot of land which is more than beis asayim, which we're going to get to the whole measurements down the line, but it's more than beis asayim. It's lehukaf ledira. Or a tail, when you have a mound of dirt. Let's say you have Rishus Rabim, then you have a mountain, then you have another Rishus on the other side, to count it or not. And it is commonly used that over there, the Magen Avraham uses these as examples for things that be'etzem midiraisa are Rishus Yachid, and Chachamim converted them into a karmelis for various reasons, for different reasons. The karfuf has mechitzis, but it's not ukaf, and the tail is a mechitzah, but a lot of people walk over it because it's off Rishus Rabim or it's next to Rishus Rabim. So you have a shaila. So the Chachamim made it into a karmelis. The question is why, and he uses these two as an example. So now, the simple reading of the Magen Avraham is that these two are, because their size is beis asayim, they're so big, therefore the Chachamim made them into a karmelis. Not stam that every single tail or every single karfuf, every single open space that becomes a karmelis, any kind of property where people will walk, where the Osur Rabim becomes a karmelis. But no, the Alter Rebbe says no, that's not. The Magen Avraham brings these as an example, and it's lav dafka yosem b'sasayim. Even if it's only 10 deep and it's 4 by 4 wide, it's still considered a karmelis. And what's the reason? He explains, maybe could be medayik it from Rashi. When Rashi discusses why Yama Shel Tveri is considered a karmelis, he says it's because it has uganim, it has a shore, it has something along the shore that raises the shore of it. So, according to Rashi, why does Rashi have to say that the reason it's a karmelis is because it has uganim? You could say the reason is, he says, because if it wouldn't have uganim and people would be walking on it, it would be considered a karmelis anyways, because people are walking on the mechitzas. So he tells you it has uganim, and therefore it's beis asayim. It has uganim and it's beis asayim, therefore it's a karmelis. But if it would not have the uganim, then even if we less than beis asayim, it would still be considered a karmelis. Now, Alter Rebbe points out this is not only in a parul in Rishus Rabim, there's this depth that if you walk around on the edges, it's b'nefat the mechitzas. Also, when you have an amas hamayim, you have a water channel going through a bika. A bika is a field which is used for planting, sowing, planting. It's not used for living. It's not a garden, it's a field. It has a water canal going through it. And the bika by itself is a karmelis. It's closed off, it's not closed off properly. Midaraisa might be Rishus Yachid, this is not Rishus Yachid. Is it mefatel the mechitzis or not? So, but the amas hamayim, if it's deep 10, it's considered a karmelis. Why? Because people will walk on the edges of it, and the mechitzis become batel. And you can't say that the reason why the mechitzas don't help is you can't say that the reason why it's a caramelist is because the mechitzas don't help for a bikeh, for amma, because we say if there's proper mechitzas around the whole bikeh, then around the whole chatzar where the amma is going through, not the bikeh, around the whole chatzar where the amma is going through, then it does cover the amma also. So obviously it's nothing to do with mechitzas, rather it has to do with the actual metzias of the amma, that being that this amma samayim has people walking along the edges, it cancels the mechitzah and it becomes a carmelis. And the lashon al tereb is elo keva elo vaday must be kevan shem prutzes the chol over sham laver aleim. Being that these, we'll call it these mechitzas that you're not visible because they're just going downwards, are paruts for each person to walk on them. Nothing from Chachamim. Why is that? Mitzad echad is a little bit daimik to Rishus Harabim because it's open from all sides. Yeah, what is it? Rishus Harabim, the definition of Rishus Harabim is that it's open, it has only two walls, and has open completely for people to walk through. So this amma is also open completely for people to walk through. What is it similar to? You could compare it to the din, another din of mavoi, which we said that if you have a mavoi which is open, which has only three walls, on the fourth side it has nothing, and it's open completely to the Rishus Harabim. This one, since it has three walls, is considered Rishus Yachid min HaTorah. But Chachamim converted it into a carmelis, even though it doesn't have the Tnai of Rabin Baikin, but it's still considered a carmelis. Why is that? Because the moment it becomes parutz l'Rabim, if it's open and people could walk through it, once you lose one of the conditions, it's already carmelis. Once you take one of the conditions out, that it has some of the conditions of Rishus Harabim. It's daimik tzas. It's a little bit similar to Rishus Harabim in something. Chachamim already made it into a carmelis, and nobody should be confused. So the Alter Rebbe comes and asks you a question. We know that the sea is considered a mechitzah. It's the halacha. And a tail, a mound that has on one side of it the Rishus Harabim and on the other side of it a Rishus Yachid, we say that the tail works as a mechitzah for whichever side we're considering it. Why is that considered a Rishus Yachid? Why is that works as a Rishus Yachid? L'chayra. If it's a yam, you have a lot of ships going by. If it's a tail that's open, that's on the top of it, is a Rishus Harabim, then a lot of people are walking past it. So how could you consider it a mechitzah? Should have been a carmelis. So Alter Rebbe says no. Since this din is not the general din regarding yam and all these things that it's considered a mechitzah. It's talking about when you have three closed ones. And the only one you're using it for is for the fourth one. So being that it's anyways the Rishus Yachid, so even if there'll be Shishim Riboy over there, you'd still be able to consider it, it'll still be considered a fourth mechitzah because it's a Rishus Yachid by definition. So now you want to make a fourth mechitzah to it, for a fourth mechitzah it works. So now, being that a mavoi, and explains, being that a mavoi has three complete mechitzas, these mavoi that we're discussing in this scenario, has three complete mechitzas. So when it does not have shishim riboy, obviously going through it, and it's not nichat hashmishtei, they weren't geyser in it at all, they only made exera mitzat karmos to make a wall in it. But that's regarding a mavoi. But when you're talking about a puddle or amasamayim, which both of them do not have three mechitzas gemuras, rather they might have two mechitzas on two sides, it's open completely from both sides, then the moment you have nichat hashmishtei, what's nichat hashmishtei? Shemehal chink tzas b'mokim zeh. Few people walk through it. And therefore, if it would have had Shishim Riboy, it would have been in Reshus HaRabim. If there would be Shishim Riboy walking through this puddle, or walking through the Samas Hamayim, it would be considered Reshus HaRabim because you could walk through it, even though it's Mehalchin Ktsas. So now that it doesn't have these conditions of Reshus HaRabim, but it is Nichot Hashmishte to a certain degree, Chachamim made it into a Carmelis. They're canceled, they eliminated the mechitzas, they made it into a Carmelis. Why? Gzeira Atu Reshus HaRabim. People are going to get mixed up and say that not only in a Carmelis, which not only in this scenario, which is a Rekak, it's not considered Reshus HaRabim. This Rekak, which doesn't have the right depth, is considered a Carmelis, that they're going to think you're going to be allowed to carry there. They're going to also think, if it's not so deep, you also could carry there. And that's for sure batal to Reshus HaRabim. Yeah, now this whole thing is based on the Magen Avraham. The Magen Avraham, if you realize, all the examples the Magen Avraham brought are all mechitzas shenaisu b'dei shamayim. Yeah, the seawall wasn't built by a person. Obviously, if it's built by a person, it's a totally different thing. Sometimes cities will put, if you go, I don't know, whoever went to Manhattan along Battery Park, there is a wall along the water that was built by people. The whole bottom of Manhattan is actually garbage to fill up, to make it into an island, rise higher. So there is a wall. It was built by the Adam, it was built hukah fladira, clearly. Nobody built it as a purpose of just dumping garbage in the ocean. It was made to generate more real estate in Manhattan many years ago. It was hukah fladira. But if it's not so, it's natural. A tail is also natural. Amas Hamayim, it's going through. A person dug it. It wasn't dug for that purpose. The water, with the time, made it into a canal. It's also b'dei shamayim. So that's what it is. All these four are talking about mechitzas shenaisu b'dei shamayim, and that's what it looks like. Then mechitzas shenaisu b'dei shamayim. The mashmos of the Magen Avraham is that if we have people walking over them and mevatel the mechitzas, why is it becomes a Carmelis? Chachamim were goyzer to make all of them a Carmelis. Why is mechitzas b'dei shamayim? That you walk over them become a Carmelis. The Rebbe says, however, it doesn't work because the Magen Avraham side is a still in his own words. I'm not going to get to it now. Side doesn't fit with the Gemara, and the Tosfos, the Magen Avraham quotes, he took out two words which changes the whole mashmos. So first, we go with the Gemara. From the Gemara, it's mashma et rabim boikim boy is not mevatel mechitz in such a scenario. Tosfos, the lashon that the Magen Avraham quotes, that mechitza b'dei shamayim eina mechitza. That's the words that the Magen Avraham quotes from Tosfos. There's two words afterwards. Kulei hai, so much. The Magen Avraham only said eina mechitza and skipped the words kulei hai. And the Alter Rebbe explains, you skipped out crucial words. It's not that it's not a mechitza, that any mechitza b'dei shamayim is not a mechitza v'rabim ha'ilchim boy. Kulei hai, it's trying to teach you something. It's trying to teach you the difference. That the mechitza b'dei shamayim is a mechitza, but not as much as a regular mechitza for different things. What is it? He says it is a mechitza. Really, mechitza b'dei shamayim is a mechitza, even if rabim boikim boy. But it's not a mechitza kulei hai so much to be able to say that anything past it, that B'kiyas Rabim is eliminated completely to such a point that you could use it as a mechitza for something else. That whole from it is a Reshus Yachid. That means, if we're talking about it itself, the mechitza is a mechitza. But you want to now go ahead and use this mechitza to make something else a Reshus Yachid. That doesn't work. That's kulei hai, so much is not. Up to there, yeah, but more than that, no. So that's the question. He says so therefore he explains, no, I'll tell him it's a little bit different shitta. And first he explains why in the Ruach Revis, in the fourth wall of a Mavoi, you do need, does work this mechitza that we say, even if Baki Barabim it works. He says like this. If you have a sea, or you have this tail, as a fourth mechitza for Reshus Yachid, according to Tosfos, regardless if it's b'dei shemayim, yes, it works. It doesn't cancel the category of a mechitza, even though Rabin boikin boy, but it does work. It doesn't work to make it ois reshus. When does that apply? It says, if all the tnaim of reshus harabim nishlamu kol tnai reshus harabim, all the tnaim of reshus harabim were fulfilled in this tail, next to the tail. And then you're going to come and say you want to use this tail as a wall for a mavoi, ruach havis. That's not going to work. But if you don't have all the tnei reshus harabim, then it does work. Then it does work. And so therefore, in this scenario, when you have the yam or the tail, it doesn't have all the tnei reshus harabim. It might not have shishim riboy, it might not have nechat hashmishtei, whatever the reason, the tnaim are not there. The reason for it is, if it would be nechat hashmishtei, yeah, if this tail or this amasamayim would be nichot, this yam would be nechat hashmishtei, it would definitely be reshus harabim, has all the other tnaim. But you lost out on the one tnai of reshus harabim, one of the tnaim, which is nechat hashmishtei. And therefore, it became a carmelis. Why? Because it's missing one detail. And the same thing he says, based on this, every other scenario where you have one tnai of reshus harabim that is missing, then you could use it as a ruach revis, and it's not mevatel, and then you could use it as a ruach revis, and then it works. But otherwise, if it has all the tnai of reshus harabim, it doesn't work. So therefore, yam and nahar and tail, they all work as a ruach revis. Why? Because they're not nechat hashmishtei. They're missing a certain tnai of reshus harabim. If they wouldn't have the tnai of reshus harabim, it would work. Now, he says, in addition to it, another reason, a mavoi of 3 walls, by definition, is not nechat hashmishtei. It's nechat hashmishtei people who live in there, but it's not nechat hashmishtei for reshus harabim. You can't walk through it. You walk into it and you hit a dead end. It doesn't work. More so, this mavoi can never have all the tnaim of reshus harabim for a simple reason. It's not mefulish. It's closed on 3 sides. It's not mefulish. It's not open from end to end. More so, you want to go and you want to cancel the wall of the tail and say that the tail, the other side, past it, because you want to follow Shittas Tosfos, according to what Alter Rebbe explains it. You want to say that past the tail, going weiter, it's not considered, it doesn't work as a wall. It also is not. Why? Because there's no b'kiyas harabim further past the tail. You have the reshus harabim over here, then on the bottom, then you have a tail, then you have this mavoi, it's parted from 3 sides. So the tail, past the tail is no longer either it's going down into a mavoi, going up into a mavoi. Past the tail, you don't have any more rabim boikin boy. So again, you lost one of the tnaim of reshus harabim. So therefore, in the 4th wall of a mavoi, it works. But if you don't have 3 walls, if it only has 2 walls on 2 sides, then if you have people walking along the walls, on the walls, because there's no real walls over here. You see, it's only going down or going up. So if you have people walking along the perimeter of what you want to consider as a mechitza, that mechitza is batal, because asur rabim mevatel mechitza in such a scenario. And even midiraisa, it would not work as a mechitza if it only has 2. And he says the same thing also you could prove from the words of the Ra'am, which was brought by the Magen Avram, that from there it also proves that if you have, that only because Leinichat Hashmishtei, that's why it became a Carmelis, nothing to do with Bidei Shemayim. And then he says, okay, but then you're going to have a problem. According to the Magen Avram, you want to say that it becomes Batal Midaraisa. You can't say it's Batal Midaraisa. Even according to the Magen Avram, if Rabin Boikin Boy, it's only Mevatel Mechitzas Midrabban. You can't say it's Midaraisa. He explains why it's not going to get to the second. And therefore, because it's Mevatel Mechitzas, at least Midrabban, according to Magen Avram, for the Magen Avram, this wall would not work as a Ruach Revis. The way the Magen Avram understands it, at least Midrabban. Midaraisa would work, and the way the Alter Rebbe explains the Tosfos also would work, but not according to the Magen Avram. So now comes the question, why Why do we have in the tail, we see that they weren't geyser in every scenario, they only geyser in certain scenarios, but in the guma, in this pit, in the Rosh Hashanah, they were geyser in every scenario. So he says in the tail that we say, we don't say Asur Rabim Mevatel Mechitza, we only Mevatel Mechitza when it's Asur Rabim, as opposed to a guma which were geyser in every scenario, is because a tail, by definition, is Rosh Hashanah even midrabanan. The moment you have the walls of the tail going up, it's Rosh Hashanah even midrabanan. So therefore, to be mevatel, the Chachamim are not going to come and be mevatel the mechitzas on a regular basis unless you have a specific reason to be mevatel the mechitzas of this Rosh Hashanah by people walking over it. But by a guma, a puddle, or the sea, or any other ones, you don't visibly see the wall going up. By a tail, you see the wall going up in front of you. And unless it's Rabbi Mevatel Mechitza, a visible wall. By Yam, people don't know the depth. By a Guma, when it's filled with water, people don't know the depth. People are not going to be able to know, is this less than 3 that you could go through until they put their foot in there. They're not going to know, is this less than 3 that's considered Batal Rosh Hashanah? Is it between 3 and 9 that it's not a Rosh Hashanah, not a Rosh Hashanah? Is it more than 10 that it is a Rosh Hashanah? And so the Chachamim guys are in all forms of Guma, that because you can't tell the depth, then even if it has 3 mechitzas, it's considered, even if it has 3 mechitzas, that it would have been considered Shus Yachid Min HaTorah, Chachamim still made it into a Carmelis. And if it would be Nichat HaShmishtei, and it would be Badal Rosh Hashanah, we consider Rosh Hashanah. So what comes out from the Alter Rebbe and the Kuntas Sachen? Mainly four main points. If all the Tnaim of Rosh Hashanah were completed, then Midei Raise Osur Rabim Mevatel Mechitza. If it's missing one of the Tnaim of Rosh Hashanah, the Midei Raise Lo Osur Rabim Mevatel Mechitza. However, midrabanan, that's the second point. The third point, midrabanan, any form of Bekias Rabim is mevatel mechitzis, and it becomes a Carmelis, even if not Nichat HaShmishtei, whether you're walking on the mechitzis, whether you're walking through the mechitzis, even if it's a puddle or it's a guma b'Rosh Hashanah, or in Rosh Hashanah, being that Rabim Oivrim Olavim, that many people walk over it or over the mechitzas or through it, it becomes mevatel mechitzas midrabanan. And if you have a mechitzah which is you can't tell the depth, like in the sea, then the Chachamim or geyser that it becomes a Carmelis in every scenario, even though it could be that Rosh Hashanah min HaTorah. Yeah. On this, you have a different Nehemiah, which I'm not going to go into all the details of it. I'm just going to point out to you where it is. The different Nehemiah is specifically on this Kuntas Sachen. Different Nehemiah is on page 122 in your book. It's a section called Biurim L'Shulchan Aruch Chad Marazak in the Chesed, and he has a few things about Siman Shimon Hey. The first long one, it's about 1, 2, 3, 4 pages, is about this Kuntas Sachen. He opens by saying, L'chayra lo zachisi l'haven divrei kachay. L'chayra, I didn't understand what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here. What are the main issues that he has with it? Is the whole Yesod that you could have that something which is less than Beis Asayim, which technically would be Rosh Hashanah, according to Alter Rebbe, it becomes Rosh Hashanah midaraisa, and the Chachamim were geyser to make it a Carmelis, and that the Rabbim are coming Vatal Mechitza of this Rosh Hashanah. This he has a hard time with it, and he goes through 2 long pages, asking questions on the Alter Rebbe, on the whole Yesod of the Alter Rebbe. Now, remember that in the other tshuva of the Divin Nehemiah, which we discussed the other time, the Divin Nehemiah did argue in the Alter Rebbe Bichlal on the whole definition of the walls around on a separate topic earlier about defining Rosh Hashanah, whether the walls, whether walking along, over there also mentions about the walls that become batal when you walk on it. And over there also it's mashma from the Alter Rebbe one way that the walking on the walls is a problem in Simach Chavav of the Divin Nehemiah. And according to Nehemiah, it's not so. But over here, he's going on this idea. He says he has a whole bunch of questions on it. His main issue is he says, this whole Yesod of Alter Rebbe and everything is based on Magen Avraham, everything is based on understanding that a Yam is only a Carmelist because it is, that it's only a Carmelist because it's not really Mislakim Metech Hilch Dal Adamis. But Lo Yitzur, the Yam will be Mislakim Metech Dal Adamis, it will be considered a Shus HaYachid Midiraisa. And Chachamim made it into a Carmelist. This doesn't make sense. It says the Gemara puts it Yam and Nahar and all these things as a Carmelist without these conditions of Mislaket. This is a Chiddush of the Ra'am. Bichlal, Metzias is the majority of seas and rivers. Metzias, the majority of seas and rivers are Mislaket. To come and say that it becomes a Reshus HaYachid, even if it's less than Beis Asayim, and it becomes and it's be'etzem b'deraisa Reshus HaYachid, no Chacham made it the Carmelist. When Rabbin Boy can boy, it's a big chiddush. And therefore he says, he doesn't hold of it. He says that this chiluk between yes mislaket, not mislaket doesn't work. Where even if it's mislaket, it will still only be a Carmelist. It will never be the Reshus HaYachid mid'oraisa. Therefore, and it doesn't conclude because it's missing the end of this is not, they didn't find the next page of the Divrei Nehemiah, back in the print it got lost, or whatever it is, the Hamshach of it. But the Maskan, it seems like the Maskan of it is that this whole din of Bitul Mechitzis only applies by a Carmelist, not by a Reshus HaYachid. Carmelist and Reshus HaRabim, you could say, Osram Vat Mechitza. By Reshus HaRabim, it's clear. By a Carmelist, you want to say Yam and these ones, it's a Carmelist that its own definition is a Carmelist. It's not the Chachamim were Geyser and took it as Reshus HaYachid and made it into a Carmelist, and then we still have Bitul Mechitzas. No. On Reshus HaYachid, it seems like the Divrei Nehemiah is in Reshus HaYachid, you don't have as Asur Rab Mevatel Mechitzah. If it's made for Reshus HaYachid, it's not, you can't have, if the Mechitzas converted into Reshus HaYachid, it's not Asur Rab Mevatel Mechitzah. The only time you have Asur Rab Mevatel Mechitzah is by Reshus HaRabim or by a Carmelist. That's what it seems like from the Divrei Nehemiah. So back to what I said in the beginning, if you're looking at this, at the walls along the rivers, and if you people walking over it, and it goes back to it, it's, like I said, obviously the Chatchila, and we follow the Alter Rebbe, that even in the Reshus HaYachid, if it's people walk over it, it's mevatel, even if it would be a Reshus HaYachid, the mechitzah will make it into Reshus HaYachid if people walk over it, asura mevatel mechitzah, but and it makes it into a Carmelist, and the mechitzahs become completely batel. But it's always good to have in the back of the head of the Divrei Nehemiah that even if you do need one day to do something like that, it will work. And with this we conclude. I'm not sure about a share this afternoon.